Hey everyone, it's Phil Frost from Main Street ROI, and I want to welcome you to Master Your Marketing webinar series. Today we have Mike Roberts from SpyFu, along with his team of Patrick and Cedra, and they're going to walk through lessons learned from a down and dirty SEO content audit. And before we get started, I do have a couple housekeeping items. If you're wondering what is Master Your Marketing series, this is a webinar series we put together with some of the leading industry experts like Mike today. And these experts are sharing their best practices, most up-to-date and actionable digital marketing advice. And each month, a new expert is going to present. I presented last month in August. Mike's obviously presenting this month in September. And then you can see the upcoming presenters on this slide. And the last thing I wanted to cover, and we'll hand it over to Mike, is just some housekeeping here. I saw Dave has already found the questions box. If you have questions, just post those into the questions box in the GoToWebinar window. Dave's also saying I'm getting lots of echo. I will actually stop talking pretty soon, and that echo should go away. Always recommend turn off distractions. And the last thing is a quick poll. All right.
That would be me. That's good.
Okay. And you can see on the screen, I can see it on my screen here, it just says, I am a small business owner, marketer working for a small business, agency who serves small businesses, or an agency servicing all client sizes. It looks like 50% of the attendees have answered so far. Looks like the majority here are marketers working for a small business, 46%, 16% small business owners, 13% agencies.
Now, are these guys able to see the results of the polls? I think that they're not. I love this. I love this polling feature. It's super awesome.
So we can,
but I think that
close it out. Looks like 80% have voted. So I'll close it out here and then share it.
Oh, cool.
So,
do I need to change presenter to share it? Oh, cool.
Yeah, so you can see when I close it out, we're at 50% business owners, 46% marketers, and then what is that? 39% are agencies on the line.
I wish I could do this in like a presentation when I do it live, right? Like you're up on stage and you're like, can everyone just raise your hands? And nobody raises their hands, you know?
Yeah.
You can never get anybody to raise their hand. Yeah, so it's pretty sweet.
All right, with that, I'll kick it back over to Mike.
Oh, cool. I was thinking there was another poll. Awesome. Well, my name's Mike Roberts. I'm the founder and CEO of SpyFu. And today we're going to talk about lessons that we've learned at SpyFu from doing an SEO content audit. Something that my team and I have we're actually still in the middle of it, but we're near the end. So I want to introduce them. On the call we have Cedra Condren. Cedra?
Hey everyone. I'm Cedra. As Mike said, I create written content for SpyFu. So everything from our full-length tutorials to blog articles to the emails that go out to our customers. So when we talk about the SEO audit, I am responsible for a lot of the sludge that we had to trudge through.
Awesome. And Patrick McGrain. Patrick?
Hey everybody. I'm Patrick. Marketing mostly videos for SpyFu, so if you see any tutorials or fun animations on the site, that's me. So a lot of my articles or a lot of my audit was based around, you know, articles with videos embedded in them and rewatching them sometimes.
Yeah, that's the best part, right? Having to getting the opportunity to rewatch everything that you've done. How long have you been here? 7 years now?
7 years, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so let's get started. So what we're going to cover, oh, you know what? I forgot. I introduced myself. I introduced my team members, but I forgot to introduce SpyFu. In case you guys aren't familiar with SpyFu, you can go to SpyFu and type in any website, see every keyword they've ever bought on Google. You can see all the organic rankings, every ad variation they've ever run, all their backlinks. Basically, the idea of SpyFu is that you can learn from your competitors, you can learn from their mistakes without having to suffer through them yourself, and you can take what they've done and build on it and be more successful. So what I'm going to talk to you about today isn't actually like SpyFu tools or anything. In fact, almost all of the tools that we use are not SpyFu tools, and to be honest, doing a content audit isn't like our core value proposition. We don't like say, hey, you should, you to do content marketing. But what I always like to share is like really like the mistakes that we've made and the successes that we've had, and like sort of the challenges that we've overcome. Sometimes, to me, I think that those are kind of the most interesting things to hear, especially the mistakes. So what we're going to cover is what is a content audit, how we did it, how we got through it, and how we're getting better. And ultimately, some of the things that we're going to talk about are things that we wish we had done, and we wish we'd done them in a different order. And at the end, of course, we'll offer a special offer to our attendees. And at the end, we'll have a live Q&A. We'll also try and address your questions as we go through this process. So ask them as we go, and Cedra and Patrick will be monitoring those, and will interrupt me if necessary to get those done. Regardless, though, I promise that we'll get to all of your questions. I'm going to try to fly through this content. Cedra and I ran through it last night. And it was, we went 2 hours long. So I'm going to go through them fast, and then hopefully they'll interrupt me if there's questions, and we'll definitely get to all your Q&A. I don't have anything else to do for the entire day. So it's always a highly engaged audience here, so we'll get to all the questions. Okay, so first thing is, why do a content audit? Maybe I should actually say what is a content audit and what are we talking about, because there's a lot of different things here. But you always hear about what an SEO audit is, different types of audits. And so what a content audit is taking a look at your existing content and essentially pruning it, improving it potentially, and looking for any issues, stuff that's completely outdated. There's a lot of pruning that goes on here. And so this is something that you're going to want to do if you have, it's not something you need to do when you're starting out. It's something that you do when you have existing content. I would say it's probably good to do it, I think it would be a good idea to do it like annually or something. We definitely haven't. But what do you guys think? It'd probably be a pretty good idea for us to do this semi-regularly. But
yeah.
Yeah, right? It'd be a good idea. So it's a health checkup for your site. You're looking at the freshness, you're looking for new opportunity, for example, in SpyFu, we do a lot of product launches, and so we would we'll tease a product before it comes out. We'll build like a launch. We'll build like launch content, but then eventually we'll build like strong tutorial content, and so some of that launch content becomes stale over time. It's also the reason that you want to prune things is that when Google looks at your site, they want the user experience to be as good as possible, right? And if you have like 500 pieces of okay content and like 10 pieces of great content, Google would clearly prefer you to have all great content. And that sort of goes to like a website quality score, if you will. Like obviously everything in Google these days is like machine learning, algorithm based, and there's no way to just sort of there's no score that we can point to that says this is what your this is what your quality of your site is. But this is something that that we know is that Google basically says, here's the overall site quality score for SpyFu or for whatever site you're looking at. So by removing low quality content, and we'll talk about different ways to sort of, I'm air quoting here, but we're not necessarily always removing it, but we're basically telling Google that it's less important. Okay, and so I'll tell you, I always like to share like my worst mistakes and failures and so on. And so I'll tell you the real reason that we actually decided to do our content audit, and that is that a few months ago we made a huge mistake. We actually accidentally set our robots.txt. We had our robots.txt set to tell Google and all other search engines not to index anything on SpyFu or anything on our resources page. And this was, I'll tell you, it worked. It wasn't like somebody went in and manually changed this text file and then deployed it or something. What happened was we have at SpyFu a fairly complex infrastructure. So we'll have like, we have like a development, we have development machines and then staging machines and then, the production stuff. And so and all of our everything that we do is automated. So when developers do something to the site, they push a button and the whole thing gets deployed pretty much automatically across all of our machines. And what the thing does is it says, am I going to development, or am I going to staging, or am I going to production? If I'm going to production, use the real robot. If I'm going to any of these other environments, just show this robots.txt that says Google, don't crawl this ever under any circumstances, right? And so what happened is that little thing got flipped. It was a little flag, basically. It said if then, and it went the other way. So it was a little tiny bug, but it had like pretty catastrophic consequences. And those consequences were that all of our content, everything that we have, got pretty much instantaneously de-indexed. And Google's like, okay, we honor your request to not show any of your content. We're like, okay. And that happened for like 5 days. So it was only a 5-day thing. We reverted it back. And what happened is we went from like 500,000 pages indexed down to like 10,000 pages indexed in the course of like those 5 days. And then when we turned it back on, a lot of stuff came back. We got about 80% back, but we lost 20%. We basically lost 20% of our SEO footprint, and I believe that that'll like eventually come back. But when you have like something semi-catastrophic like this happens, it's like, well, let's just do everything we possibly can to make everything better, so that when we bounce higher. And so we've kind of been doing that. We have been doing that. Like the marketing team has been doing all this SEO stuff that we have sort of neglected for some amount of time, and our content audit is part of that. I think that's all I have to say about that story. Here's the takeaway. And if it ever goes wrong, you might not notice it right away. And if it goes wrong, then even if you get it back right, you won't necessarily get all of your traffic back right away. And so I recommend using something like Status Cake, or there's there's a crap. If you search for, I wish I remembered this. I could actually use this now. If you search for robots.txt monitor, there's a free product. I'm sorry, I didn't think that I would actually be recommending this, but there's a free product that will actually monitor for changes in your robots.txt. So if it ever changes, it'll send you like an email alert or like a text alert, and that I think is actually a pretty useful tool, a useful thing to do, based on our catastrophic experience. So anyway, that's the real reason that we ended up going through this process. It's sort of an emergency in that sense, but there's no real such thing as an emergency content audit, but in our case, we kind of approach it that way. Okay, so what do we do first? The first thing that we do is we basically do, we want to inventory all of our content. And on SpyFu, what I'm talking about here, by the way, let me narrow the scope a little bit. When I'm talking about the content audit that we didn't audit all of the content on SpyFu, meaning the pages that you're, when you do a search, we're not search results. We're talking about the resources.spyfu.com, which is our WordPress site. It's where we put all of our editorial content, our tutorials, our videos, and so on. So it's all the stuff that we are constantly, that we're producing on a regular basis. So we want to get all of this. We want to get an inventory of all of our stuff into a spreadsheet. So the way that we did it, the way that I did it actually, is we used our sitemap, and our sitemap actually is generated by a WordPress plugin called Yoast. Millions of people use Yoast. If you use WordPress, you probably use Yoast, and it probably generates your sitemap automatically. If you don't, download it, install it. It's free. So then what we did is we took our sitemap and fed the sitemap into Screaming Frog. And Screaming Frog, I'm not going to go into a tutorial on Screaming Frog. If you want to know how Screaming Frog works, type in Screaming Frog tutorial or something. But what it does is rather than crawling our site, rather than crawling its links, if we feed it just the sitemap, it'll just download exactly those files that we want it to download. And that way we don't have to worry about whether or not something actually has links to it, right? Whether it's crawlable, X number of layers deep, and we also don't need to worry about whether or not it's crawling, off of our, WordPress content. So then that Screaming Frog spreadsheet, and we take that spreadsheet and we feed it into a product called URL Profiler. Oh, by the way, Screaming Frog, I think, will do like a crawl that's like 500 pages. I think it'll do that for free. Ours is a little bit bigger than that, so we got the paid version. I think it's like $200 a year or something. So then we use URL Profiler, and by the way, we'll have a list of these tools that we used at the end. Cedra added that in, and so we take this Screaming Frog results and we feed it into URL Profiler, and URL Profiler does quite a few things. It adds quite a few pieces of data, but some of the more important ones are that you can get free backlink stats for each page from Majestic. It pulls those in via their API. You can actually use quite a few different tools. Like it integrates with a bunch of different APIs. That's kind of its thing. But the Majestic backlinks are free. And then the other thing that was really useful is in terms of being able to sort and categorize the data or the pages, is to be able to get the date. Now it's interesting because neither of these tools, neither Screaming Frog nor URL Profiler, actually get the date that the thing was published by default. But URL Profiler has this cool little, custom field where you can basically scrape something off of a page by, I don't know, I think you have to use a JavaScript selector or something. Anyway, it's not super complicated. You could Google it. But anyway, it allowed me to get the date published off of the content. And of course, when you're looking for stale content, one of the first things you want to look for is the oldest, right? Start at the end. It's probably your most, we have content that's like 10 or 11 years old here. I'm not sure that wait, hold on, sorry. And then finally, we want to drop that whole database into Google Doc, an actual spreadsheet. So I'm kind of like a technical nerd. So the first thing that I want to look for, that I personally look for, are I look for like technical issues first, because usually those are, oftentimes they affect multiple parts of the site, and so you can make like one small modification and you fix a whole bunch of things. So anyway, you want to look for 404s. You want to look for other statuses, 301s and stuff that you don't expect. I was going to look for missing titles or really short titles, duplicates. Those are kind of low-hanging fruit. Duplicate H1s, missing H1s. I look for missing meta descriptions, although those are fairly common in our stuff, and unfortunately, but we're also going to be looking for like duplicate content. So for example, for us, we have a glossary, and for every, we have like a whole glossary, right? It's like, here's all the terms and stuff on SpyFu, and here's all the, the definitions for them. But then each of those glossary items has its own page, and of course, that ends up being, duplication. So the other thing is that when you find these errors, you need to like write those down and move on. You don't necessarily want to fix them right away. So that obviously, if you find, when I did this, I actually found a few errors immediately and felt like I needed to fix it. And I guess as I was talking to Cedra yesterday, what I did was I actually didn't, do it myself. I went over and like pulled a developer off of his current task and had him fix something, but I had him do it like pretty much immediately. It was, but in general, when you find something, it's best to do it and then to find it, log it, and move on. And then you're going to break the project down into chunks. I'm not an advocate for like planning. And the reason is that there's a good chance for various reasons that a project like this can fail because you get into this zone of diminishing return. You're like, oh, I don't know whether or not to remove this piece of content, or should I canonicalize it, or 301 it, or what should I do with it? And what's the better piece of content? So you get into this zone where you don't know what to do. So, but you should go through things, look for the technical errors, go through them all, then fix the technical errors. And then move on to the next step, which might be cross-linking or whatever we set the next step to, and then go through and implement all those things. So it's kind of like analyze for a few days, execute for a few days, analyze for a few days, execute for a few days. Does that make sense? Is that kind of like what you guys think is the best approach?
Definitely. That was one of the things that it took us some little bit of momentum to be able to figure out. It's really tempting to just stop and tackle the small things, especially because they feel like easy wins. And when you're doing something as tedious as going line by line through a spreadsheet and looking at all of your content, and sometimes feeling that pain of like, oh man, I loved that video. I worked so hard on it. I really don't want to see it go. You really do want to have that almost small victory of taking care of a small task. So one of the things we learned was if you can just hold off, don't take care of things that seem easy, because they'll lead to something else. Just make note of it. It's going to make your life so much easier down the road. And I will probably emphasize that more times throughout this presentation.
Because there's a context switch, right? Even if it's a 2-minute task, and kind of like productivity, like sort of tips are generally like, if something's less than 2 minutes, you should just get it done right now. But there's a context switch that has to happen when you go into your WordPress editing, and then you come back to the spreadsheet. It's
yes, spot on.
It ends up, yeah.
Spot on. You're exactly right. That's what would take us down. You would be working on something and have that context in your mind where you've just reviewed, let's say I've just read an article and I've reminded myself what it was about, because maybe it was from 2 years ago, and I would remind myself what it was about, some of the points I covered, and think, oh, that's right. It's really important that I call this out. If that was something I had to come back to and repeat that again and again, it would just be devastating to my productivity.
good. That's good insight. So the next thing we want to do is really, this is kind of this is the next thing we want to do is to organize the content. And so for us at SpyFu, think of SpyFu as like one, giant product, but it's actually, for us, it's a bunch of little smaller products like Combat and AdWords Advisor and Recon Files and backlinks and keyword grouping and so on. So we have lots of content that's sort of in these little silos telling you how to use this product. And then we have things that are like, how do you start an AdWords campaign? How do you improve your AdWords campaign? How do you do backlinks outreach? And so these things kind of span across many different products. So there's like these subject areas, but then there's like a bunch of like things that are pretty relevant to products. And we actually have a lot of content that has to do products, because we also launched those products. And when we launched the products, we built content in advance, and then we built content, just telling people how to use that stuff. So there's many different articles, many different videos on the topic of products. And this actually, for us, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, and this is kind of your, this is, I think, Patrick's innovation in a way. But I think that we didn't do this first ourselves, but we wish we had. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, there was a lot of ways that we could look at the different articles and see, like, it'll be titled "How to Use Combat" or something, so you could kind of infer from that. But having it at a glance was something that we learned along the way. It's like, okay, I can infer that this is a thing about AdWords Advisor, but that doesn't help with my sorting. Doing the products and having it in a very simple, like Combat, Recon, parentheses, SEO or something like that was pivotal for the sort. And we'll talk about the sort a little bit later. But having it at a glance, I really wish we started with that. But it was an important lesson learned: simplify and get it organizable.
So if we were to do this over again, we would do this step first, and I completely agree, because having done the other steps first, it would have been a huge time saver to have gone through. Because it kind of seems like the downside to doing this categorization is that you feel like you're maybe like not actually executing. You're not actually getting something done.
Yeah.
But it is ridiculously useful in the next steps, and that's why we put it first. This slide, I think, was at some point one slide. So yeah, you basically want to find your content opportunities. You want to break your content into like I said, topics and products and levels of expertise. And then here's where it gets important, right? Is that you want to find the strongest piece of content in any particular area. One sort of shortcut, by the way, to both of these things that I found was I would take the subject area. Like, so for example, if we're talking about SpyFu Combat as our product, I would search in Google. I'd do site:/spyfu.com and then type in, combat or some subject, right? And then I would see what does Google think is the most authoritative on this subject, and then I'd also note which other products or which other pages come up in there. So that was, if I didn't know the answer, sometimes I would go to that myself. Just a little shortcut. Now we're going to refer to these strongest pieces of content as your cornerstone content, and you could call this kind of anything. We're actually stealing the name or borrowing the name from the Yoast product, and so then everything will tie in. Yoast actually calls its the main topic the best articles or whatever in a subject cornerstone articles or cornerstone content. Do you guys have anything else to add to that? Cedra, I think that you talked about Cornerstone stuff. You had something.
Sure. This, you know, and you're not obligated. So don't feel like if you mark something or highlight something Cornerstone content, oh no, I've committed. There's no commitment. This is completely for you to help yourself. You're basically investing in your own productivity down the road. It's something that we picked up very much later in the process, and we wish that we had known it earlier. So at the very end, when we realized, hey, this Cornerstone content is something that I want to be linking other articles to, or maybe I want to canonicalize something else to it, which I know we'll get to that later. But
did you ever have a situation where you didn't feel like there was anything that was worthy of Cornerstone within a topic?
Sure. Okay. There were times I had it on both ends of the scale. I'd either say, well, there's nothing that I really feel like is worthy, or maybe I'd look at an article and think, I don't really know if this is strong enough to stand on its own. We would mark it, and that's something that we do talk about later in the process. There's room for you to have that uncertainty, and there's room for your team to help you overcome that uncertainty. And also, it's a good thing, because that kind of uncertainty is something you get to address and probably leverage that into new and better content. It's
Mike,
whole circle of life.
I had a quick question here that relates to Mark's recent question. So Mark just asked, please repeat how you did the Google search for Cornerstone keywords or content. And
sure.
My related question to that was, are you relying solely on Google to tell you what's Cornerstone, or are you looking at your own content and saying, hey, I know this is our best piece, and then kind of cross-referencing that with what Google thinks is Cornerstone?
I would definitely look at the content, and having created a lot of it, I know Patrick is, he has created many videos over the years. We were pretty familiar with our own content. So it was easy for us off the top of our head to say, oh, that's right, I know a piece that's better than this. I know something that's stronger, or I know something that's in the works that's going to be stronger. I know Mike has a tip, his Google tip was something that was more of that fail-safe in case we were just feeling like we were doubting ourselves or couldn't really think of something that was strong enough to stand out. That's where Google could come in. So I think the question was to repeat, Mike, how you used Google to remind you what Cornerstone content might be.
Yeah, so I'd look at what our subject is, and if the product is the subject, I would do site : SpyFu, and then whatever the topic that I'm looking for. So I'd do like site : SpyFu combat, and then the results, I'd get like 10 results or something, and so those would all be candidates for. The top result would be what Google would consider to be our Cornerstone, if you like, but I wouldn't necessarily just choose that. But certainly, if you throw your weight behind the one that Google already thinks is good, that's not a horrible strategy if you don't know the right answer right away. But for sure, for us, there's clear winners in a lot of categories. Really, if it's a narrow category and you don't know what, then that's a way to do it. But it's also a way to find the long tail. I mean, you can look through your spreadsheet and look at every piece of content, and that works too. But you can also kind of cheat a little bit here and there. Use Google. It helps. All right, so moving along here. So the next thing we're going to do is ask objective questions. This is piece of content outdated, and remember, we captured those dates, right? But just because something is like, well, usually when something's like 8 years old, it's kind of outdated. I don't know. We have like evergreen content that's like 8 or 10 years old, but we might. I don't know. we generally looked at that stuff, and that was kind of an empirical thing. But sometimes it can be sometimes the content can be salvaged, and for us, salvaging the content, oftentimes, at SpyFu, we're doing like a release, every week. We're constantly improving the product, or constantly, so we have products that are brand new, like AdWords Advisor is brand new, but AdWords Advisor is actually like interactive now. It returns results in like, you know, a second, but it's based on a product that we built like 5 years ago that's also called AdWords Advisor, but it had to run and crunch the numbers for like, you know, 30 minutes. So we've got kind of new content and old content. And in some cases, some of the old content is excellent, and we just needed to replace the screenshots. That would be the case for, you know, like SpyFu Combat we launched in like 2008. So we've got some great editorial content about how to use SpyFu Combat to do all kinds of cool things, but it may have an interface that's like 3 generations old. So those are things that we could salvage. And then I guess the other question here is whether or not it's worth redirecting it to another piece. And so there are cases where we had content that it just didn't even make sense to redirect. Most of the time we'd want to be able to redirect or do a canonical. And we'll talk about the differences between those decisions in a second. And then I have this note here that says, don't take action, just make a note. Right, and that kind of goes back to the old thing where we're like, okay, we want to get through all these actions and then act. Not necessarily spending the entire time planning before we act, but we want to, you know, get through one section and then act on that section.
Especially because something like redirecting, if you have 15 pieces that you need to redirect, you can probably open one page and hammer that out in a matter of seconds versus how much it's going to replicate if you try to do it line by line, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, you can do bulk redirects, and there's a lot of things that you can do in bulk. Yeah, so this is where that highlighting your cornerstone content for every category comes in really handy. It's a good comparison for upcoming actions. So the next thing you want to do is ask the tough questions, right? Do we need more than one article about this topic? And so there's kind of these almost competing ideals in content marketing, and one ideal that we've used in the past is called is basically least minimum publishable unit. Like so like, can you actually hypothetically publish a page? Is it a thought? Can you put that out as a page? Good. If you can, then publish that and then publish another page. So like the most extreme example of this would be like a sort of a BuzzFeed thing where they've got, you know, the top 10 most awesome football catches or something like this, right? And so then what you'd see is a picture, and then it's like, okay, you want to see the next picture? Click the next, click next. And so you basically, the whole thing, they could put all these pictures with all of their commentary on every picture on a single page, but they don't. And the reason that they don't is to get more page views. And the reason they want more page views is to get more ad revenue. And so content marketing for the purpose of generating page views and content marketing for the purpose of increasing SEO, sometimes those ideologies or those ideals get mixed together. And so in the case nowadays, what we found by looking at, you know, like ranking signals and so on is that top ranked content tends to be long. Like average top content is like 2,400 words, whereas like a least publishable unit, like the smallest publishable unit would be like, you know, 500 words or 600 words. Even I think even when you're like using like the Yoast product, right? It tells you, okay, well this thing is less than 600 words, so that's not good. But realistically, we found that things should be longer. So oftentimes we found that we can combine articles together, and that actually ends up being a better choice. So so one thing that we can do is absorb the other article into the existing article and redirect the old URL. If you feel like both pieces of content need to exist, I'll give you an example. Because I was just talking about the ranking signals. You guys have probably seen like studies on ranking signals for Google. What things does a keyword in title cause something to rank? So anyway, there's these studies. Everybody puts them out. People put them out like sometimes once a year. Oftentimes they put them out every year. It's like 2017 ranking signals for Google. So let's say you did one for 2016, and then you did one for 2017. Both of those pieces of content are totally valid pieces of content. They're both unique. But if you're doing a search and you want to find ranking signals, you would want to actually canonicalize your old one, your 2016 version to your 2017 version. So I may have put the cart before the horse here. Let me explain what canonicalizing actually is. Like I said, I always like to admit my mistakes, and I think I've talked about this one before, but for years being in this space, and this is really embarrassing, I actually ignored canonical, like the rel canonical tag. And the reason that I ignored it, and I hate to say this, is that it seemed, I was like, I heard people talking about it, I'd hear people talking about it in like conferences, and I just sort of ignore it. I tune out because I'm like, okay, well, what they're talking about right now is a little bit more technical than I need to pay attention to. I'm a technical guy, by the way. I'm like, I'm just going to listen to other parts of this. I'm going to tune out right now because it sounds like a word that would be accessible. It sounds like a developer-y word. It doesn't sound like something that's going to be super important to causing you to rank. But what canonical is, or maybe it has to do with the Pope or something, right? But canonical is actually super important and useful to everybody, and every website needs to use rel canonical tags. And so I'm going to tell you the easiest way to think about this. Okay, so you have to so when everybody should be using campaign tags for all kinds of things, email marketing, in your ad campaigns. Ideally, when you're using bit.ly links on social media or whatever, you should have campaign tags for every link that goes to your site. So you would have, for us, we would have a link going to SpyFu that would say https www.spyfu.com / C equals whatever. These are the campaign tags that I'm talking about. That's best practice. And we know that when somebody goes to spyfu.com, we want to redirect them to www.spyfu.com because otherwise it would be duplicate URLs. And furthermore, if we want them to use the HTTPS version, we would redirect from the HTTP to the HTTPS or not. You don't actually have to do that, but you could. But what you don't want to redirect is from that campaign tag URL. You can't redirect the campaign tag URL to www.spyfu.com. That would be bad. You'd lose your Google wouldn't log the the campaign stuff. That Google Analytics, you'd lose that. So you don't want to do those redirects, right? So what you do when somebody lands on that page is you rel canonical that to the root page, right? Otherwise, Google treats that as a separate URL, and so your link juice is essentially split between, your 100 different campaign tags and your home page, right? So your home page would actually be losing link juice, which would also mean that everything downstream from it would be losing link juice. So we don't want to have that happen, and there's a variety of places where that does happen, or where that could happen, and you need to use canonical tags. Otherwise, you're just basically slicing up all of your link juice, and that's a bad thing. So I'm going to talk about, we're actually doing things where we're not just removing straight up duplicate content where the home page is the home page. we're doing things where it's similar content. And so what I just recommended is that you rel canonical an older piece of content on the same topic to a newer piece of content on that topic, meaning that you're recommending to Google that they index this piece of content. You're not de-indexing or removing or redirecting the old content, you're rel canonicalizing it. And that's something that we do actually really often in our content audit. So what the rel canonical does is it says to Google, this page is the authoritative page for this topic. So oftentimes you'll have like you know, in e-commerce you have like these a whole bunch of different like sort of category pages that can get really long because you have like you're filtering and filtering and filtering and filtering different ways, and you want to point those weird trees up to like a single topic page, and that's a case where it's not truly duplicate content, where it's really common to do this. And ultimately what you're trying to do is eliminate any duplicate content. Here's another example. I think that the examples in this stuff are actually pretty important because we did get into a lot of gray area, but here's one where we, at SpyFu, we do a release like every week. Every week we publish something new, new SpyFu stuff. And every release that we do, we publish release notes, and the release notes say, you know, here's some bugs that we fixed, you know, here's some new features that we released, and so on. It gives you a detailed breakdown of what we just did. And but that content, you know, like that content, actually every piece of every release that we do produces a page in WordPress. But those, if you were to land on that individual page, it wouldn't really make any sense. So what we do is we canonicalize every one of those pages to the list of release notes, because ultimately if you wanted to find out that stuff about SpyFu, the list of release notes would be significantly more valuable to you. Do you guys have anything else to add to this canonical stuff?
I think you've covered it well.
Cool. So the other thing about canonical is that it's pretty safe. We're definitely not saying, we're not telling Google, don't index this page. We're saying, we think that you're looking for this other page. We think that this would be you'd be better served by using this one as a result rather than the one that you have. But Google can still crawl to that page. It can actually index the content. It can show the content in SERPs, although we're voting that they don't, and it can crawl the links that exist on that page, you know, to the pages that it links to. So all those other things are meta tags. They'd be like no index and no crawl. I'm sorry, no follow. And we're definitely not saying that. So the other thing that we do is we do sitemap optimization. So when you go into your Google Search Console, and what we're looking at here is, of course, resources.spyfu.com. And what you want to have happen is for every page that you submit to Google, so you see how we have 326 pages submitted in our sitemap, and we have 248 pages indexed. That's not good. that's actually subpar. What we want to be at is like 100%. So what Google does is it looks at your sitemap and it says, do I think that you're giving me a good signal? And to Google, 99% or better is a good signal. So we need to have like 323 or so pages indexed out of the 326 submitted in order for Google to consider our sitemap to be a good signal. So that's what you're going for. So what we did is every time we did a canonical or a 301, we removed that page from the sitemap. I don't think that there's any case where I can't think of a case where we would want to canonicalize where we wouldn't want to remove something from the sitemap. But you can totally remove something from your sitemap. Like, you can definitely prune your sitemap without canonicalizing or 301ing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Here's an example. If you have like a login page, you wouldn't want to canonicalize that to something because there's nothing newer and better and more correct, but it also doesn't need to be in your sitemap or your privacy policy or terms of use. Those are obvious cases where just prune those things out of your sitemap so that your sitemap sends a stronger signal to Google. This is clearly something that I have that I haven't done yet. I'm sure that that we'll end up doing our sitemap stuff soon. Actually, to be honest, we've actually improved. I think when we started out, we had like 1,000 pages and like still probably the same 300 pieces of content indexed, or whatever, 260.
And it's, I know it was written at the top there, but it's just worth repeating since there was a question. You find that in the Google Search Console.
That's right.
Just from memory, let's see, it was Google Search Console, and on the left side nav, I think you go under crawl, right? Yep, there it is. You go to crawl, and then there's sitemaps there. Yeah.
And that's interesting. If you've never submitted your sitemap to Google, you don't have to submit your sitemap to Google through there, but it actually happens pretty quick, right? So you can submit your sitemap, and basically, usually Google will have it updated within like an hour, and so you can kind of test this. So it's the kind of annoying thing, though, is that they don't actually tell you which pieces of content are indexed versus which ones aren't. Of course, you could do something like site:/SpyFu, which is, I'm sure, what I'll do. I'll probably do that to compare, to see what's actually indexed versus what is in the sitemap. And I'll find those gaps, and then I'll remove them from the sitemap. That's right. I love this slide, actually. Cedra did a great job with it. It's funny. Makes me laugh.
Thank you.
Know. Yeah. Too bad I didn't have it up
for Obi-Wan Kenobi. But okay. Let's see how it is.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. All right. So your spreadsheet so far. You've seeded it with your list of content. You've noted any technical errors. You've marked any older content that needs to be updated, marked any similar content that needs to be redirected, and marked any thin or near duplicate content to canonicalize. Did we talk about, or do we have are we going to talk about later what the difference is when you decide to canonicalize versus 301ing? Is there a future slide on this? I forget.
We will certainly have, we can talk about it now. We will certainly have the opportunity in another example.
Okay. I just see that Addie just asked for whether our pages that are being redirected being indexed by Google. That is so that's kind of the core difference, is that if you do a 301, Google does not have an opportunity to index it. They don't have an opportunity to follow any of your links from that page that are outlinks. And so when you're 301ing, the good thing about 301ing is that you're forwarding all of your link juice for sure up to that content that you're 301ing to. The downside is that you're basically getting rid of that content. So it has to be a complete replacement of the existing content in order for you to feel good about it. Or it could be like straight up, useless old content that you don't care about anybody ever finding ever again. And so we did a lot of 301ing, and I think we did more canonicalizing. Does that sound right, you guys?
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
What do you think the breakdown was? 301 versus canonical?
80-20?
Yeah, probably.
So 80% canonicalize,
yeah.
20% redirect.
Of the things that we did canonicalize or redirect, it was probably an 80-20 split. That doesn't take into account everything that we said. Just leave it alone. Just do an SEO review. So I couldn't tell you, but of everything else that we did, Patrick, do you think differently?
No, that feels about right. But I would say it's about 80%, and then 20% 301s. But yeah, and then
And Mike, yeah, and Mike, you had asked how we determined between the two, and you gave us a really good rule of thumb that canonicalizing is far less aggressive than redirecting, of course. And redirecting is almost like the death blow to that piece of content. And so the rule of thumb that you gave us was, if there's pretty much no reason that someone should land on that page, then redirect. But if you can think of a case where someone might want to find that page, then canonicalize. So that was really helpful. We erred on the side of canonicalization when it came between the decision, should we just leave this alone and do an SEO review, or should we canonicalize it? I think that was the tougher question. Whether we canonicalize or redirect, that was pretty much an easy no-brainer. And then quick side note, thanks to everyone's patience for how much we use 301 as a verb, because that was one of my favorite things. 301ing, I 301'd this. Yeah, just go with it. Sorry for any purists who are cringing.
I'm going to start using that in like real life conversations for like non-technical web things. So somebody just asked, thin content equals short word count. I'd say, yeah, that's pretty much a good indicator. Short word count would probably be thin content. Yeah, I mean, you can also like kind of like look at it and see if it seems like it's not really accomplishing much. Tool alert here. So we have so we use Yoast. I've talked about this before. It's super inexpensive. Actually, we bought like the pro version so that we could target more than one keyword for every article, and like that's kind of the only reason that you need to get the paid version, but still it doesn't matter because it's like $60 like forever. And yeah, like Yoast isn't like necessarily, I don't know. It's actually a pretty good tool. Like it actually seems like it's like really low end because it's free and like nearly free. But all things considered, I actually think it's a pretty decent tool, to be honest. I was kind of surprised because I haven't spent a whole lot of time in it, but it's pretty decent. And it let you know our non-technical people, our non-technical team, kind of just do all the things that are kind of technical. Content, 301s, canonical, removing things from sitemaps, and so on. The other thing that it did, well, I think we have that later. So the other thing that we really loved, and these guys found super cool tricks that I've never even seen before, was Google Sheets, and I think that this is kind of your thing, right, Patrick?
Yep. Yeah.
You want to talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Google Sheets was like immensely helpful. We realized pretty much from the beginning that we would need to work on the same document. And at first I ended up making a bunch of duplicates just to figure out, because we know how to use Google Sheets, but like not to the extent that we needed to for this really large and complex project. So a big part of this, let's see, when you're done gathering data. So I know we keep saying this, but we kept going through over and over and over again, and not digging into each individual piece of content. We went through and identified the product. We identified whether or not we wanted to be 301, canonicalized, or SEO review, which means it's good and still relevant. As a quick note there, a lot of this was Cedar and I going through it first off, and we made the content. So I'm getting some questions. A lot of it was like gut check. There was never like a cutoff date. If this thing was made in 2014 or 2015, automatically cut that off, canonical or 301. We actually knew the content. But a big part of that was bringing in other people that didn't know the content like as intimately as we did to do it. So the collaboration in real time was important. And the way we were able to all collaborate together was through filter views. And this was an absolute game changer for us. If you sort or you reorganize or you filter in a collaborative document, what will happen is it'll change it for everyone. And if people are actively working in it, that can be extremely detrimental and annoying and can screw a lot of stuff up. So there's a trick that you can go to filter views, and you can see on this screenshot that we actually set up a bunch. Some were just like test views, like filter 1 and filter 2, just to see how it worked. What will happen is you still collaborate on the same document, but each view is unique to you. And everyone can see the filtered views. And so if Cedra or Zach, who also helped us on this, wanted to see videos only, which was usually my filter, they could. But if they wanted to look at Cedra updates, only Cedra would see that. I would be in the videos only. And that means you can sort, you can filter, do all that stuff. Everything that you type inside the document will be universal, but at least the view will make it easier to work with. So the cleaner your data, the more valuable your filtering is. And there was a huge part to be able to sort by product and then sort by, for example, SEO review. So it's like, okay, we have 3 pieces of SEO review content on ad history that helped us identify which was the newest, which was the cornerstone content, and keeping that as consistent. And if you have multiple people working on these columns, that's okay. Near the end, I started formatting like the products, so they were all the same. So it wasn't like, you know, different names for the same thing. Recon PPC, change that to AdWords Advisor, and you can kind of go back through and make it easier for everyone. So
that's super awesome.
and this was this is a huge note. If you don't know what to do, leave a note. Someone else might be able to figure it out. Or you might go back and know more things about your own content by that point. And so that's okay. You can brush past it. It's better to brush past it than spend 5 minutes sitting staring at one piece of content and debating, I don't know, should I do this? Should I do this? Just make a note.
Yeah, definitely, because other people might know it in a flash. And on the flip side, if this is someplace where, let's say we're all just completely focused on separate tasks, and we're working on this audit, if you were to interrupt the entire team, that you're just multiplying the level of destruction, you know, by saying, okay, you stop what you're doing and you stop because I have a question. And so if you were just to have a column dedicated to spots where you need help, everyone else can take a glance at it on their own time when it works for them. And what I really love is it makes it cool for people to be like, I don't know. And then they ignore it, or they move along, or sorry, man, I don't know. And then at least you're not feeling that pressure as a collaborator of, well, I'd better stop what I'm doing and research so I can come up with an answer to this. No, it allows everyone just to go back and focus, and it allows a lot more productivity. So we are big supporters of that questions column.
Cool. I'm gonna try and get us moving through, because I realize that we're slightly over. I'm gonna try and get us move through some slides, and we'll get to QA at some point here.
And that's what I just covered, the Star Trek one, so you can skip that.
Oh, sweet. Yep. Okay, cool. So part 2. All right. So the good thing is that part 2 is not as long as part 1. we're not just halfway through. We're pretty close. Okay. So the part 2 is near and dear to my heart, because I ended up doing this, and that is targeting the right keywords. And, you know, obviously at SpyFu we do keyword research. I've done keyword research for SpyFu's stuff many times. But I figured I would kind of like start fresh to see if we would discover other things, given kind of like a broader scope. Oftentimes we focused on like really like the core, the heart of like the product offering, but we've kind of, you know, we've grown as a team, and we have a lot of content, and so I wanted to find keywords that we could, that were a broad list of keywords that we could target in our space. And by the way, when I'm doing this process, like it's an internal process, I actually don't limit myself in any way to like what tools I use. And to be honest, obviously we used Spider Monkey, what is it? Screaming Frog. We used Screaming Frog and Yoast and a bunch of tools. I used Ahrefs. You know, I looked at SEMrush, I looked at Moz. I have access to all these tools, right? So I didn't limit myself in any way, and some things I liked better than our tools, and in those cases I used them. But in terms of organizing the keywords, I honestly love the way that we did what we did, and I couldn't find anything better. And I'll tell you, like, I did this keyword research project while I was on vacation. I was at the beach, these guys were toiling away, and I'm basically trying to find the core keywords for us. And I probably spent 20 hours doing it, and I did it over like a week. And what's cool about it is the way that I could just kind of easily come back. I thought going into this that I would need to use a spreadsheet, that I would probably use SpyFu, but I would probably go through, find a keyword that I liked, add it to the spreadsheet, which seems counterintuitive, but what I wanted to do was not start with a huge list of keywords. I wanted to find the broad topic areas that we could focus on, even if they're not perfectly aligned with the tools that we offer. And so the place that I started was SpyFu Combat, and so I would go in and look at these various tools, or I'd probably click on the middle area here, and then you see I'd go through and I'd kind of like shop. It was like shopping cart, or like Pinterest. It was like liking something or whatever. And when I'd just click this add button, and then it would throw it over into my SpyFu, and it didn't matter what tool I'm on. Oops, it didn't matter what tool I was on. These things. So it would populate this list, and then my SpyFu would magically start tracking everything. But what's cool is that I would be on any other page, and I'd see the list of keywords, and I'd immediately be able to see, do we see this in this? Am I missing it? Yeah, you can see like this keyword here was already added. If you went down lower, you'd actually see that that there's a bunch of them that weren't. So all I'd have to do is just like find the ones that weren't added, and then if I liked them, add them in. I actually sorted things when I was doing this by search volume, because I wanted the biggest ones. I didn't really want to worry about the long tail at all yet. I wanted to just find the topics. And so I was able to find 500 or something or whatever. Let's see. Oh, there's animation. Sorry, guys. Wasn't anticipating the animation. So the idea here is that we want to make sure that every article that we have actually targets a specific keyword. Now, when we wrote this content, we didn't necessarily have an SEO objective in mind. A lot of the content that we have that's tutorial based and so on is the metric that we track isn't acquisition, it's retention. We basically want to make sure that when people read it, they engage with it and are actually better able to use and benefit from SpyFu. But going back through our audit, we want to make sure that we're at least putting into our spreadsheet, the keyword that the content is targeting, so that we can add that into Yoast, and then Yoast can give it, we can give us recommendations and so on. So, I should say that once everything goes into the My SpyFu thing, I absolutely exported it, right? I just basically used the My SpyFu area as a shopping cart. Of course, My SpyFu is kind of cool because it's constantly tracking. It tracks like every keyword ranking every week, so I can also see how we're progressing on those broad topic areas, or on those major keywords, and that's actually kind of uplifting because we actually have made some significant progress. But ultimately, I export it to a spreadsheet, and then I share the spreadsheet with everybody so that they can go through and look at the content, and then decide. Some of the stuff that we have doesn't fit any of those keywords, so we don't actually necessarily need to force it to happen. But if it happens naturally, then we do it. Or and then likely we end up with like a couple hundred keywords at least that we haven't written any content for, and so then it helps us define our map going forward. And so that's another one of the benefits of this is that once we know what we have, we know what we need to build. I believe that's like one of these next slides, not that slide. Okay, anyway, so So the other thing that we use, of course, is the Yoast tool. And what's cool about the Yoast tool is that it kind of gamifies this process a bit. Once you have like the SEO keyword that you want, or the keyword that you want to target, it gives you like sort of like this green light, yellow light, red light thing. And like in order to get a green light, you probably need to use the keyword itself that you're targeting in the content, and probably in the H1 tag and maybe the title tag.
I've included I included some screenshots in the next couple of slides of what it looks like when you're in the tool. There's the first half. So here's just an example from an article we're working on. And you will not have green lights in everything. What I found is that Yoast will prioritize what are the most important things to guide you through. It's almost like having a coach there, just someone saying, okay, you have a lot of work, but the most important things, let's knock those out first. And so we started experimenting and we'd say, okay, we could, let's increase the length of the article. Did that work? And then refresh. Oh, I still have a yellow light. Okay, let me go back, and you look at the things at the top of their list. So go to the next slide. And you'll see that they prioritize it. Smaller things that are red toward the top, those weren't as important as things that we had gone through and turned green. So it's almost like it gives you a suggestion, you turn it green, it refreshes and gives you something that's a little less priority. So the fact it says you've used this focus keyword 2 times before. I dug into that, and we actually had, I think Patrick had a video that he used this as a focus keyword on, and then we had another article that it had the same keyword. It's almost like a suggestion, a guideline, but I don't think that is going to tank our standing. It's not going to tank the ranking here. It just wants to advise us of some of our practices. So I found that over time that Yoast is just going through like, all right, you've earned a few greens. Let's see if we can dig into the more minor concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you definitely don't want to over optimize, but it's kind of fun to go through, and it gives you like these really relatively simple tasks for you to get done, and kind of helps out there.
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about Yoast. I'm not super SEO savvy doing the actual work, and Yoast was extremely helpful to just kind of, like you said, gamify step by step. It made what could have been a very complicated and convoluted process extremely easy.
So let's talk about something meta descriptions real quick, because it's one of the things that we spent a decent amount of time on, or we had like quite a bit of opportunity to do. Meta descriptions are, they're a meta tag, and you hear kind of like that meta tags are like less important, or you hear that they're super important depending on how old the content that you're reading. Generally speaking, a lot of meta tags, like the keyword meta tags, are like straight up not important. You don't need to use those at all. But meta descriptions are still important, but they won't actually. Google doesn't take your meta description into account as content to rank you. Okay, but what it does is what the meta description is it's the part of the SERP that is this description here, this summary, right? Now, Google doesn't have to use your meta description. It's your suggestion to Google what the meta description should be. And if you stuff it with keywords or some horrible practice, then they're definitely not going to use it. But if you write a good summary of the page and then add in like a call to action, or make the summary like kind of clickbaity, then you can increase your click-through rate, right? Like, people are more likely to click on your result. And if they're more likely to click on your result, I mean, user experience is, click-through rate is a signal for Google, right? Like, so if you're at the bottom of the page and you're getting an outsized number of links, it's likely that Google's going to increase your rank. Also, specifically if you're providing a good user experience. So you don't want to have something that's over-promising and under-delivering, then you'll increase your bounce rate, and Google will also take that into account. But crafting these things as a marketer to increase the click-through rate is going to benefit you. But some of the things that we found when we were doing this was that, because the general rule of thumb is to write like a 160 word or 160 character meta description. And in the last year or so, Google's actually increased the width of their SERPs by like 100 pixels. And so what that translates to is potentially like what you hear is that you can get 200 characters on in your meta description. But it's not totally consistent. It's interesting because what we have here is a situation. This bottom one, Google actually puts in the date, and so it for some reason ends up cutting us off at like 139 characters. We found this in the SERP. It's odd though, because this is like actually only like a line and a half of description or of meta description. We had a 155 word or 155 character meta description, and they cut it off 139 characters, but they cut it off right here. So it's a little inconsistent because you have all this extra space. The other weird thing that Cedra noticed is that when Google decides not to use your meta description, when they use their own, they give that one three lines. You see that 279 characters, that's a Google generated one. So these are the sort of things that are happening on the SERP, and it's something to take into account. Do you want to have like your call to action, or do you want to have more real estate on the SERP? It's kind of like, I mean, my hunch is that Google is split testing between, your meta description and their generated one, and deciding in some cases to use their own. But it's interesting that they're kind of giving themselves an unfair advantage. So let's do a recap. First, we downloaded all of our content, took an inventory, and put it into a Google Doc, a Google Sheet actually. We added all the columns with lots of details, and then we added in our categories, help column, and so on. We kept our focus on reviewing content and saved action for later. Do you guys recall? I'll ask you this later. We found the right keywords to target and flagged existing content where necessary. And finally, we went back through to the needs improvement stuff, and did an on-page SEO audit of those pieces of content. We added meta descriptions for improved click-through rates. We targeted specific keywords. We made better SEO titles, H1 tags, created longer titles, longer articles where necessary, and put in crosslinks, lots and lots of crosslinks. Good Lord, let me talk about crosslinks for 1 second. Crosslinks, I would break doing crosslinks into 3 steps. The first step would be taking your your main pieces of content, your cornerstone, if you will, and linking out to your sort of leaf level content. So making sure that those are providing links. And then I would second, and you could maybe flip these steps if you wanted to, I would take those leaf content and I would make sure that they link to their respective cornerstone content. And then finally, I would make sure that all those leaf things actually link to each other where it makes sense. Otherwise, you can get mired in this super long process of trying to find links. Okay, other big takeaways. You guys want to talk about this too? Number one, do it with a team, and that just sort of makes sense if you've ever tried to do like a really long, tedious project by yourself. It's you have your team members to help you stay accountable. I know that you guys sort of commiserated while I was gone. like this sucks, but at least we have each other.
Misery loves
We
company.
said your name with nothing but love. The entire time when you were on the beach. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
I do want to point out, I know a few people say that they've got to leave soon. They have an appointment coming up. So we are getting to the end. We are going to wrap it up. We have a few big takeaways that we want to recap. And yes, we will be emailing out this presentation to everyone who registered. So once you registered, if you're listening now, you're going to get this sent to you automatically via email. That will be coming, I think, from Phil at Main Street ROI. So keep your eyes peeled there. And yeah, back to the takeaways. Give yourself milestones. This especially goes back to number one, of working with the team, and now number two, give yourself milestones. If you can break the work into chunks, it really becomes that light at the end of the tunnel. So many times when Patrick and I were talking about how much we loved Mike for this process and we were commiserating, we would know, okay, we're just going to crank through. It's probably another like 2 days dedicated to this, and then we'll be through the section where we review what we canonicalize. Or, okay, I know once I get past this, then I'm going to be able to go back and recap and look for descriptions of what I'm going to cross-link to. So as long as you have milestones, not only does that give you something to aspire to, but it also gives you that stopping point where everyone gets to regroup and review what worked and what you could have done better.
Yeah, and there's a part when you look at a sheet that's 700 or 800 rows or something, it seems like it's a lot more than you'll ever be able to handle. But when you break it down to bite-sized pieces and are able to delegate some of those tasks to your team, it makes it a lot more manageable and digestible.
And so someone had asked just now, Helen had asked if we could go over the internal linking. Yeah, it very much ties into what we're talking about because it was a gut check in many ways. There were some pieces of content where we had already a fantastic structure of internal linking. We put together a huge, massive tour when we first rolled out the recon files years ago. And when we rolled out this tour, the recon file report itself was broken down into like 7 different sections. And I remember creating a tour that was a written tour, and there were 7 different articles, and they would all link to each other. And then there were specialty articles like talking about customizing your report, and we'd link to that. At the same time, Patrick had 7 videos talking about those same steps and those same parts of the report and customization, and his videos would link to the articles and his videos would link to each other. So you could take a written tour, you could take a video tour, and they all linked. So there was this amazing intricate structure already in place. Then we would look at something like ad history, where we were really weak when it came to cross-linking. So to answer your question, Helen, it was a matter of reviewing what was already in place and then looking for those opportunities where we had gaps. And so going back to our big takeaway, I think one of the things that was on the slide before that was if you're doing the redirects, if you're doing the cross-links, work on that in a chunk, one thing at a time, because especially if you're using Yoast, if you're using WordPress, your redirects are done on one page. You open it up and you can just fly through it. Here's the original, here's where it's going. Here's the original, here's where it's going. And you can take care of 20 redirects in a matter of seconds. If you're working on canonicalization and you're deciding that one article is going to canonicalize to the next, you are going to have to open up the first article and click edit and then scroll down and click the little tools button, and it's not as smooth as a process as the first one. And the reason I mention that is once you realize that, it's something that you can let it play to your advantage. All right, I'm going to get myself a coffee and I'm going to work on canonicalization right now because I know that's going to be a tedious process. So if you break those tasks into chunks, it's going to serve you. You're going to be a lot more focused than trying to just approach everything at once. Oh, this one's me too.
So yep. Yeah, I'll add some context just to change the voice. But I talked about this earlier, and one thing that we found is that currently, like longer content is dominating the SERPs, particularly for business to business stuff, and so we found that we want to target like a length of about 2,500 words. So I'll kick it over to you there, Sidra.
Thank you. So one of the core functions of SpyFu is it circles around your competitors, about knowing your competitors, learning from your competitors. So we had created plenty of content on that topic. In fact, I've been writing so often about how you find your competitors and then I would segue into something else, that I ended up making one standalone piece that was just a quick matter of steps and screenshots. Here's what you do when you go to the site and you want to find your competitors. And that became a really helpful piece. For the purpose of this story, I'm going to tell you what we call it internally. We call it task-based navigation. So that one piece of task-based navigation, I could link to it from any new article so that I wouldn't have to rewrite those steps every single time I wrote about competitors. And then about 2 to 3 years ago, I wrote a couple of articles that were about finding your big competitors in a space and then looking for emerging competitors that maybe you hadn't seen before. And that became like part 1 and part 2 of, they were 2 standalone articles, same idea. We published them separately, and part 2 started to take off. Part 2 was a lot more popular. Part 2 had more traction in the SERPs. And in fact, I think a couple people linked part 2, so it was just a stronger piece of content. And as we were going through our audit, I remember that I would even canonicalize other pieces to part 2. So when Mike helped us realize that we wanted to aim for something that was more around 2,500 words or longer, that became the perfect opportunity to make this big, like, Frankenstein piece of content with part 1 and the part 2, just roll them into one big one, and then also include the steps. Here's how to find your competition. So we're going back to that original task-based navigation piece that I mentioned. So when I rolled those all together, here's why I didn't use part 2 as my base to just bring part 1 into. It had part 2 in the URL. It was as simple as that. I didn't want to put this monstrous piece out there and have no part 1. It would be a phantom piece of content. I created a new piece of content, a new big article. I brought in all 3 pieces. I redirected part 1 into the new Frankenstein article. I redirected part 2 into the new Frankenstein article. And then that first piece that I mentioned, the task-based navigation, remember, it's still valuable. It still needs to be out there because other articles link to it. So I canonicalized that piece into the new one. So
Perfect.
It's kind of a great example of my
subtle and complex, but like basically you use a combination of redirects and merging of content and canonicalization all together.
That's right. And Indica had asked that earlier about repurposing an article. I hope that helps you with your question, Indica, because it is going to be a matter of whether you feed everything into a new piece and redirect or canonicalize it is going to be based on what you currently have. So I simply did not want to repurpose that existing URL, but the content needed to be repurposed. So that's why I created a brand new piece.
Sweet, and so here's that tools list. I don't know if we have actually links on here, but you can see what the URLs are. Screaming Frog, we said we used urlprofiler.com, and Yoast, of course, and of course SpyFu, which I was pleased to actually use. I was kind of surprised that I was going to end up using it in here too, to be honest. Of course, I'm going to use SpyFu somewhat, but I was surprised at how much I ended up using it. And finally, a special offer so you can for new customers, we'll give you a 25% off of any monthly plan. Right now, SpyFu is $39 a month for the basic plan, and should be $79 a month for the pro plan. So you would get it for like either $29-ish or $59-ish. Also, if you're a current customer, you can upgrade to the $899 professional annual plan for just $399. So it's a savings of like $500. We always get the questions from our existing customers on the phone or on the call here, and so hopefully that's a pretty awesome one. So we have time for, sorry we ran over. I kind of wanted to err on the side of making sure that I gave you all the content, but we definitely have time for as many questions and as we want. So if you want to stick around and ask questions, we're here until we conquer them. Anybody see any questions you want to address here? We've got lots, by the way. There's probably
I really
80
like this
questions in
one.
here.
I really like this one from Melissa. It's such an interesting perspective. Can you perform a content audit in a dev environment prior to pushing live? Would it be the same steps? So like doing it in a sandbox, which is really interesting.
Yeah, you absolutely can. In fact, that would be a better process than ours. We don't do that. I don't think there's like a huge risk to most of the things that we're doing, but certainly when we installed some of the tools and made some of the changes, for example, when I found a redirect loop we had some, I forget what those pages were that were redirecting. Was it the glossary pages or FAQ pages or something? We had some portion of our site where when you went to it, it ended up like putting you in a redirect loop.
That was the glossary.
Solved that problem. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was something that we of course solved in development and then pushed to stage and then live.
Someone else.
Steps would be the same.
Sorry, I'll just follow up and definitely recommend backing up your site if you don't already have a backup before you start implementing some of these changes. As Mike said, you're not really doing anything too crazy here, but at the same time, if you do start making changes or your team starts making changes and then you lose a ton of traffic, all your rankings plummet, you might want to revert back to that backup. That's always good to have.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point for sure. You should definitely always have like a source control for everything. You could ask, if you're not technical, ask. It is actually semi-common for WordPress implementations not to have a backup or have all the stuff in source control. If you have a developer that's doing it, make sure that you ask them. They'll be like, yeah, we have source control, or they'll be like, no, we don't have source control. We just push it to the FTP site. You should probably know that. It'll help you in all kinds of ways, actually. What else do we have? I see a couple that just came in.
Yeah, let's see. How did you realize this de-indexing was happening? So you started off the webinar talking about a little bit of background, and how did you actually realize that that was the issue?
Let's see. How did I realize that was the issue? Because it's a good point. I think that the first thing that I noticed was, okay, so probably the metric that I look at most often, and everybody here looks at most often, is like sales. So we're like constantly like looking at like, how many sales do we have in a day or whatever, and because it just refreshes on a dashboard that we have. So I think, and I'm really in tune with it because I just know what things should always be, and so I think that was probably the first thing that alerted me to it. So when I see like sales drop off, even like maybe by 10 or 20%, I'll like start looking for anything that might be wrong, because we've had things go wrong many times. And so I went into Google Search Console to see if anything had dropped off, and I noticed that. And I actually didn't catch the robots.txt error. That was actually Tree that found it, guy that works here. And but I guess I like raised a alarm. Like something must be wrong because our SEO traffic just tanked, and so somebody else found it. But because I have such a crappy metric that I'm tracking at the top level, which is sales, and that's what I'm obsessed over, I guess, it had a delay, right? Took a little bit of time to notice the pattern.
We have a few questions about the timing of content, the freshness of it. So let's see if we can blend them. One is asking if there's a sweet spot time frame for when that content becomes outdated, for, if you're trying to figure out if you should remove it or repurpose it. And then another is asking how far back should you keep that or just rewrite it so it's fresh. I'll start on that a bit, and then Mike and Patrick, you can chime in. A lot of things we were forced to update simply because the evolution of our site made some of the content obsolete. And that's something that we did a great job in some areas and not so great in others. So you'll almost have to put in a a checkbox when you're updating something on your site, like, hey, does this affect content? Are my screenshots now outdated? Or is there a step that no longer exists? So it's more than just the links. Sometimes also we'd go back and read articles during this audit and say, oh my gosh, I think I have a different perspective on that than I do now. And in that case, you could probably either rewrite the entire piece, rewrite part of it, or almost treat it like a, you know how you'd retweet your own tweet and you comment on it? It's almost like rating an article in response to your own article, saying, hey, I've changed my mind, so I want to address that, or I have a different perspective. But definitely keep it fresh, stay on top of it. 3 years seems like a good sweet spot. I'm not telling you that that is something that comes from Google or from any SEO expertise. It's just that as things start to feel dull, it's probably going to be within that whole 2 to 3 year range.
Another interesting thing that I realized and wasn't expecting to is you find your content gaps. It's like, okay, what's the newest article on ad history, for example, and realize that it's 5 years old. And so when this process is done and we start building content again, that's, you know, top of the list. You find some of those content gaps where you're like, oh man, I gotta update this now or do an entirely new piece of content. So that was both discouraging, but also like a good thing to realize, a good takeaway.
I see a question here that I think is kind of interesting because I've actually tried this. It is how does A/B testing affect SEO? For example, would it be okay to write 2 different articles that both optimize the same keyword in order to see which performs best? You know, I'm like a huge fan of split testing. We've had nearly miraculous results doing split testing on SpyFu, And so I wanted to apply it to SEO, and one thing that I did was I did like this canonicalization experiment where, you know, all the SpyFu results, we have, you know, all the dynamic when you do a result. I basically made like half of those pages canonicalize up to their marketing page, and half of them not, and then I wanted to see if there was a difference that I could measure. And here's the thing with SEO is that it doesn't happen predictably, like your normal traffic to your site or like ads that you pay for kind of come in a predictable way, and you can isolate the variables, right? That's the key to the science of split testing, is that honestly, you're running things, you're taking the exact same traffic, splitting it directly, and splitting it at exactly the same time. You know, like if you like ran a split test by running, you know, one homepage this month and another homepage next month and tried to compare those, that wouldn't be a valid split test, and you'd get oftentimes, you know, wrong results because it's a different set of users at different months. You're not actually isolating the impact of, you know, seasonality or like, you know, just general growth or general shrink in sales. So unfortunately, it doesn't work well. You can't really split test. I didn't get good results. I mean, I didn't get results that were anything useful. I couldn't see anything, but the problem is that I don't even know whether or not Google is taking these things into account yet. So you don't know when your test starts. If you were to optimize, like you're saying, for a specific keyword, you wouldn't really know whether you're not really getting the same traffic. Google would, you know, I wouldn't recommend doing what you're doing, but I also don't think that split testing works well for almost anything in SEO. Unfortunately, you kind of have to just take what you think is going to be the best choice and do it, and just keep trying to get better. You just try to like keep improving every day. We have a kind of mantra at SpyFu, and that is, you know, better than yesterday, and that kind of helps us to move beyond perfection to execution. Kind of a long answer.
Time for one more. or more. Actually, this
Definitely.
one should be quick. I saw 2 questions in there from people who are they're small. They're like, hey, I'm a single person. I don't have a team. It's probably the same as this question who says, I'm curious about quick wins the others have used when struggling to prioritize your own content audits versus what you're doing for your clients. So that's a great perspective because we've been talking all about our team and doing this for ourselves, but many people on this call are doing this on behalf of clients and themselves. I can say my husband has a small boutique agency. He falls into that so often. And sometimes at SpyFu, we talk about, the cobbler's kids have no shoes. So it's very easy to get, distracted, and you're not able to do that. One small thing is to schedule a meeting, and that is a meeting with yourself. It goes along that same idea of every paycheck, you pay yourself by putting some in the savings. You force it by scheduling a meeting. It blocks it out on your calendar, even if it's an hour or 2 hours where I am going to work on my own growth, on my own site, my own content. It's critical. So just force it. I don't know if other people have any tricks that they want to share, but that's one that I knew I could pass along.
Awesome. I see somebody here talking about having lots of clients, and they're talking about we have many clients that don't have many articles or videos that we can work with. Is on-page SEO key for these clients? Is it more or less impactful than the back-end SEO work? I think that probably on-page SEO it's the place to start, right? Like you got to have SEO is usually about, there's like 10 simple things, and most people do like 3 of them, and the best sites do like 8 or 9 of them, and that's it, right? If you can get those things right, if you can get that formula right, then you're likely to increase your ranks. But it's not necessarily as immediate as doing some kind of outreach or whatever. I think it's a combination of things, but man, you'll never steer anybody wrong by improving their on-page SEO. I don't think that if you can find significant issues that you can improve for a client, it's hard to force the results to happen because who knows if they actually even have any inbound links. But you'll certainly never, first do no harm, right?
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that and definitely echo the importance of on-page SEO. The best analogy would be, on-page SEO is the foundation for your SEO, and if you don't have that set up properly, then all that work like outreach, link building, it's just going to basically a house with no foundation that's just going to crumble. So as Mike said, you can't go wrong. Focus on the on-page, get the site built out with the right content, and then after that's set up, then start focusing on the off-page SEO.
Hey Phil, do you have any tips for content audit stuff? Did we miss anything?
No, I thought this was awesome. One thing I will just go back up because you had that tool on the tip of your tongue, and somebody found it.
Oh yeah, the one that monitors your
change. Was it changedetection.com?
I think it actually had like the words robots in it. Robots. Maybe somebody else answer a question real quick, and I'll just search for this on my phone, and I'll find it.
Okay.
Is there any other question that we can answer in here that you guys can see? With longer pages, I can see them ranking better because people stay on them longer. Do you have any ideas about other reasons? Okay, so what I've read, crap, I can't answer. I need to do the search. But
I might be able to sum up what you've read if you want to search.
Yeah, I'll search.
It seems like more recently, Mike has kind of found out that Google is favoring longer articles as of like recently. It didn't used to always be that way. You know, even our Yoast stuff is like, okay, we want to get this up to 300 words, or if it's cornerstone content, 900 words. But we're finding out through independent research that it might be like a lot longer. Google favors longer articles that are, you know, what would you say, like 3,000 words or something like that. And I don't know if it's because people are staying on it longer, or if Google is just generally liking that. Another interesting thing that I found out is that they also favor longer YouTube videos now. That didn't always used to be the case, but if it's an extended video that goes on much longer than necessary sometimes, Google seems to like it more.
That's why we're doing this webinar super, super long. So meta. I mean, the product, by the way, is called roboto.org. ROBOTTO. Maybe I can just paste it in here so everyone can see it. Let me see. Send to all. I should be able to do this. Roboto.org. It is free for the stuff that I'm talking about. It's like you can pay for it for something, like, but I don't think you need to.
I'll follow up quickly on Patrick's answer there for long content. So the way I like to explain it is, if you put yourself in Google's shoes, so Google's trying to serve up the best pages for every search, and they were trying to give a really good user experience. So when you think about it from that perspective, what Google's trying to find is the most comprehensive article online about a particular topic. So that's why it lends itself to just really long, definitive guides that you'll see online, and those are the types of articles that are ranking #1 for certain searches.
Sweet. I think that we've got, I think we've answered pretty much all of the questions, like, because you guys were actually answering a lot of questions as we were going along. Do you see, are there any other ones that we need to address here? Or I know that once this thing closes, I think that we are not actually able to go back in and answer those questions. Somebody asked if we would send the master spreadsheet. I think that we can totally do that. Who wants to? How do you guys want to handle that? Like this guy Mark here asked for the master spreadsheet.
I think we can make a copy of it and take out the sensitive material and share like the basics of it. Does that sound good, Patrick?
Yeah, if we can do like the column headers, you know, at the very least, just to give you guys an idea. Just
like the top 5 rows or something. I don't know that there's anything particularly sensitive in it, probably, but we could just, you know, just give you the top 5 rows as samples or something, right? Mm-hmm. How do you want to share that? Do you want to send it out as an email follow-up?
Works for me, you bet.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. Let's see.
People are wondering if let's see, if information is still relevant but was written 3 years ago, is a good idea to rewrite it for Google to see it again and not to think that it's old and static?
Yeah, we answered that one a little bit earlier, just a couple minutes ago. But yes, it is a good idea to rewrite it. Sometimes I would have to rewrite something simply because of a paragraph or 2 lines. And I'd go and freshen it and sometimes tighten up the language just to make sure it was still flowing well, make sure all the links were still working that we were recommending, and then change the date on there that it was published. Not only will that bump things up in your blog and make things look fresher to Google for when you updated it, but sometimes in some cases that even opens up your comments again. In places where you have comments automatically closed, that can reopen it and give you some opportunity for other people to engage.
Cool. Well, I think that we're good. I think that we can. I just went back through all the other questions. Oh, what is the best way to find duplicate or near duplicate content? This is from Mark. Best way to find duplicate or near duplicate content. Well, I think that the way that we largely went about it was like looking at the content. But there is, but that's because, quite honestly, Patrick and Cedra are subject matter experts, or like they wrote the content, and so they're intimately familiar with it. But there is in URL Profiler, there's an API that you can use that'll basically check your content for duplication, right? So I forget what that plugin is called, but that's basically its purpose. So URL Profiler kind of integrates with a bunch of people's APIs, and so you can pick and choose what you need. And the one that I referenced in there was Majestic's backlink API, but of course, like I said, you can plug into anything. I don't think we actually ended up using it. I know we didn't actually end up using it because we didn't need it, but there's APIs you can use. I forget what it's called. I feel like it's like I want to say like Contently or something, but I don't think that's what they do. Whatever. I don't know what it is, to be honest, but it exists. An API exists. Another thing that you could do if you wanted to know whether or not the content was duplicated would be to just like copy like a section of it and then search for it in Google. So like copy like like 150 words or something like that, and paste it, or maybe not 150 words, but 150 characters, like a line or two. Just copy and paste that into Google, and if it comes up as if there's another article, then it's duplicate, right? We got anything else? Any other questions? Oh, Copyscape, copyscape.com for duplication. I'll paste that in here too. Thanks, thanks, Eileen. Copyscape.com. That's the one I was thinking of. What tool would you use for looking at the internal link structure? Anybody? Any ideas? Anyone? Visualizing the internal link structure?
Sorry to sound redundant, but again, it was just about partly knowing the content and revisiting it. The recon one is what comes to mind for me. I opened up a spreadsheet. I would paste in a URL and then just have like a staircase drop down. So for example, if it linked to article number 2 would go right below number 1, but one column in, if you could visualize that. It's like column 1A is my main piece, and then whatever it links to, that was column 2B. And then if it also linked to a second piece, that was column 2C, or maybe it's C3, and so on. And I would keep staircasing, so then I would look at the piece that it linked to, and I would find all of its links. So for recon, I would that helped me visualize it for this massive staircase, these repeating staircases, to make sure that everything was covered, not only for getting links to it, but having links go out.
Yeah, that's true. So the other thing that you can look at in terms of like link structure, and it's not, because link structure internally is kind of tricky, because if you want to visualize the whole thing all at once or whatever, but Screaming Frog definitely shows you like the links, the outbound links for every page. Also, actually, you can use Google Search Console to do that. And someone else mentioned that you can use WordPress to do it. WordPress will actually, Yoast will actually make, and actually this is part of the Yoast Pro, right? So Yoast Pro for like $60 forever will do internal link analysis. And it'll basically, when you're writing an article, it'll make recommendations for articles that you should link to. I think we didn't have great success with that. What did you guys think? Did you guys use that at all? I know that it makes the recommendations, but I think that the recommendations weren't awesome. Maybe they were. What did you think?
I did not use it at all. Did you, Patrick?
I didn't either.
Okay.
No, I didn't either. It was a lot more.
Were you guys aware that it was there? Were you guys aware that it was there?
I didn't trust it, so I was aware,
okay.
but I
Gotcha.
looked at it like once.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I probably know this better in my brain than it does.
Same. And I know a lot of people listening are probably yelling out tools that we could have used. But again, this really was a down and dirty content audit, because this isn't something that we normally do regularly. We probably should start learning about the tools that are out there that could do that exact thing, to look at that link structure. But we are just diving into it, like really getting dirty into it and grasping that content and going through line by line to see what was working. So just a very honest answer about why we brute forced it so much.
So Dan asked, is there a SpyFu for dummies that I can share with other members across my divisions that talks about how to use it? We'll probably want to reply to that directly with like a link or something, but what do you guys think is the best place to go? Probably straight up resources.spyfu.com.
Straight
Yep,
up resources.
I was responding to Dan actually right now. Resources.spyfu.com will allow you to watch a video that tours it, or read articles, task-based navigation. It'll help you start off with SpyFu and internet marketing in general, or you can even get a handy tour.
Like the very top half of the page basically points you to like 2 or 3 pieces of content, whether you want to consume it, whether you want to read it, do you want to watch a video, or you can actually get a one-on-one demo. So those are like the 3 main things you can do, right? But it's all basically, here's SpyFu, SpyFu for dummies. I mean, also like the homepage is kind of like designed to get you there, but those are the places where the tutorials are. Like resource.spyfu.com is the top half of the page, of the page is going to give you those 3 core things. Yeah, and I think that's a wrap. I think that we've got everything. Thanks everyone for showing up. Thanks Phil for inviting us. Not sorry for going super long. I'm glad we were able to get to all the questions. Thanks Patrick and Cedra for doing all the hard work and even putting together the presentation. I had a great time.
Yeah, thanks Mike, thanks Cedra, thanks Patrick. I thought this was great, and from the feedback here on the Q&A, it looks like everyone enjoyed this as well. Ton of value.
Cool.
Thanks
a lot, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, take care.
Bye.